Hey everyone, last week live on Twitch, I got to interview some pretty amazingly brilliant people, and here's the recording. I hope that you enjoy them half as much as I did. All information is going to be in the links in the descriptions. If you want to check any of it out, go ahead, click on one of those links. Thanks everybody, and see you in the next one.
All right, I want to introduce you guys to Srini. Srini is the founder of Aerospike. He currently acts as the CTO, right. And he has offered to join and talk about the Aerospike story. So Aerospike just recently had a very monumentous round of funding, and it's been a journey in the making, and I would love to talk about the journey that you've had, the experiences that you've gone through it, and just understand that a little bit. So should we start with the round of funding or start all the way at the back?
It's your call, so it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm happy to participate in the live stream. We could start at the beginning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then the funding is just a result of a lot of things that happen, and we could also address that when you think it makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fantastic. So let's start at the beginning. You got your PhD or master's?
Both. I got my PhD. Yes.
And your thesis was on?
It was on some kind of index construction algorithms, but it's about online transaction processing is one way to put it. It's all about OLTP, as you call it.
Yeah.
That's the general area of my thesis.
Okay. So how did you come to the conclusion to create Aerospike? Like, what went through your mind?
It's a little bit of a story, so as you called it. So I will talk about how I came to it. So as I just mentioned, my PhD thesis was in this area, but really after my PhD, I graduated and I went to work for IBM. Built certain new products in the database space to connect the databases to the internet. This was in the around the time that Netscape was founded, 1994, 1992 to 1996, and I built out. I was, as part of a team, but it's only like 2 or 3 people. We built this connection for IBM DB2 to the internet, so that, and then what happened was within a couple of years, there was all this activity on the internet companies, and I just switched out from the database field, and that would continue for about, 16 to 17 years. I was outside the database field. So basically what my whole premise then was that the database technology had already been invented, so to speak, and it was actually working well. And a lot of the innovation was happening in how to use databases for the new internet applications. So I spent a bunch of time in an interactive TV company and eventually went to another startup, which was in the mobile space. And the mobile space was interesting to me because we were doing mobile before mobile was cool. It was in 2000 to 2005. We built a lot of the technologies you take for granted in a mobile phone. We built all of those things then in a small company, which got acquired by Yahoo. And that's where the reason for founding Aerospike kind of materialized, because we had built all these applications for mobile and millions of people were using, as opposed to billions of people today. Tens of millions of users for mobile existed in around 2005, 2006. And 2007 is when the iPhone launched. So at Yahoo, we built a lot of applications that would work on the iPhone. Okay. And we were picked, in fact, to be the mail product for the first iPhone. And the reason Steve Jobs picked us was because our team, including people like Meher and Joe Martin in Aerospike, they built out this notification scheme for email when it arrived. And the reason, and Google didn't have that. Gmail did not have that in their mobile devices in 2007. And so Yahoo Mail got picked for that. And while we were doing all of this scaling to tens of millions of users, we encountered a number of database problems. Essentially, databases would freeze up. And we were, it is not so much, I'm not against the existing databases then. It was more like they were not built for the real-time read-write workload, as I call it. And that's when we would have all kinds of problems. And then the reason the Aerospike idea came was because of all these problems I had with doing read-write transactions on existing relational databases. Doesn't matter which one, all of them. And that's what caught me, and then what happened was Yahoo pulled out a mobile for some reason, which was kind of a bad decision. So I decided to start looking around. I ended up meeting Brian Bulkowski, who's my co-founder in Aerospike, and we chose to basically build a database which will work for those kinds of applications we saw in mobile, in ad tech, and we hoped will also happen in other areas, which has since happened, of course. But that was the whole start of genesis of it. And there was some more details I can go into in terms of the technology and why we even decided to start a company. But the fundamental reason was we wanted to build a better database to handle mobile and internet applications.
You wanted it's like the scale and real time at the same time. Like it's always easy to do real time if you have like 5 users and like any database can do. But like having millions or billions of people and being able to maintain that same well, that's really awesome. That's really awesome. So you guys decided to start it, and I guess talk me through like the early days of Aerospike, because like the database, there's like some really big, there's really big people that compete in it. Like to me, that would be a really daunting, you have these people that, even some open source ones that have been around for a very long time at that point. That had to be terrifying.
Actually, it was not terrifying as much as I would say there was a lot of curiosity for us. So the first thing you have to realize is both Brian and I are technical people. So we've done deep technical work in various areas. I worked in distributed file systems as well as the database field. I'm generally a systems person, and Brian is an amazing networking person. He built some of the earliest networking stacks, TCP/IP stacks, and so on. So we kind of realized that a database in 2009 when we started this needed to be a distributed database. It is table stakes to be distributed, and both of us had between us the knowledge to build a distributed database. And we, of course, thought we could do it better than anybody else. I mean, that goes without saying. A startup is only started by founders who are a little bit crazy. And so we had that. But more interestingly, Brian also discovered, due to a mutual friend of ours, Dave Flynn, who's the founder of Fusion.io, discovered SSDs. And then he explained that to me as to how, I think Flynn explained to Brian explained to me, how SSDs work. And that gave me the idea, really, to, when Brian and I first talked, to start a database company. Because Brian had already done some work on this before we met, but he was mostly focused on building out a fast cache. But because I have this database experience from before, from Wisconsin, in my PhD and so on, I realized that when you had Flash, and Flash was typically you can do reads and writes in maybe tens of microseconds, maybe 200 microseconds for a proper read-write end-to-end in the database is doable. So you can get sub-millisecond, well under sub-millisecond reads and writes, okay? Memory, of course, is in nanoseconds, main memory. But if you look at an application requirement, what Flash allowed us to do is to do random access to data on Flash. So we did not have to keep all of the data in DRAM or in memory in order to satisfy the sub-millisecond read-write response times. There were, if you look at any other database other than Aerospike, you will have to keep all the data in memory. So Aerospike invented, right? And that's when we came up with this hybrid memory architecture. We put the index fully resident in DRAM and the data directly accessed from SSDs. Immediately, it gives you, first of all, it gives you the 10x advantage in performance, which you will also get if you put everything in DRAM. But with this hybrid memory architecture, combining a fully resident DRAM index with a fully resident data on SSDs, the cost per bit for SSDs is a lot lower than cost per bit of DRAM. Let's just say it's 10x. So you get a 10x advantage in cost of running the system. It doesn't stop there. So it's not an easy problem to solve, as you pointed out. So what we had to do was, okay, now we know that we can do direct access to SSDs. We have to write a file system which worked around SSDs wear leveling. Again, all of this we knew when we started the company. We had to deal with all this stuff. And so we do large block writes, log structured file system. Think of it as a way to exploit SSDs to do sub-millisecond reads and writes. The parallelism inherent in SSDs, in the sense you can stick multiple SSDs per node and so on, dozens of them per node were even done in 2010 or whatever when we launched our first first few customers. The interesting thing is the parallelism allows you to push a lot of IOPS through the system. So far, so good. But that doesn't stop there. We also, if you put more data, right? So let me explain it in plain English kind of thing. So instead of storing about a terabyte of real-time data per node, if you had to put all of it in DRAM, with SSDs, you can put maybe 100 terabytes of real-time data today. In those days, it was 15 to 20, but still it was 10x to 20x more real-time data per node. So instead of having a 100-node cluster for a 100 terabyte database with everything in DRAM, you can have a 10-node cluster or fewer with more of this data, 10 to 100 terabytes of data per SSD in a node. So you now only have small cluster sizes. Okay, that's great. But then you also have to work on the in-memory process. And that's where Brian's experience and my experience came in, because we are also, I worked in the Unix kernel. Brian had written code inside small devices, like interactive TV devices, where Brian and I met in a company earlier where we worked on interactive TV. So we had all of this optimization knowledge of how to make things work in, take advantage of the modern, CPU architecture, processor architecture, memory architecture, NUMA. How do you align threads with processors, NUMA pinning, CPU pinning? How do you make multiple, and Brian being a networking guru, parallel networking, how do you build these networking pieces? So what we did was we can now push, it's a long way of saying, we put 10 times the data, real-time data per node. We did all the hard work required, written in C and so on, with multi-threading to do 10 times more transactions per node. So now you have a system which is not only, at the same level as a pure in-memory database, but it can now scale to petabytes in just 20 nodes in Amazon. We've shown that. So this is basically a fundamental, change in how you handle real-time data.
I was gonna say the ability to get up to petabytes of data with so few nodes has always just blown my mind, and maintained, like, throughout all of that, you've maintained this real-time, this real-time access to your data, which is, again, just amazing. It's really amazing. Okay, so you guys worked and made this. What was, like, obviously there's a lot of different applications, or like lots of different ways you can use this. You talked about, like, push notifications was like kind of what you were doing with the mobile space. Where do you see, a lot of people, do you need to get that?
No.
Where has, like, there been a lot of growth in people leveraging this? Because, like, as a startup, usually there's a niche that you go after, and then usually that niche widens as you acquire. So, like, how did that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because the first thing, when Brian and I talked, we realized that we had something which was almost has a 100x advantage, 10x in performance, 10x in better TCO. So we had a 100x advantage. Moore's law typically gets you about 2x every couple of years, let's say. So within 5 years, a 10x advantage typically goes away. But 100x, on the other hand, sticks around for a while. And we thought that would be a good reason to start a company. But that's not in itself, you need to find, like you just mentioned, Marek, people who will pay for it. So the first thing that Brian did when we figured out that this was viable to do, even before we started writing the code for our version of the software, we basically decided to go do some kind of market research. So we were in Silicon Valley, so we just called up like 40 to 50 of our friends in various industries, and we just had a spreadsheet, and we said, okay, we're going to go. And we had a thesis, essentially, what are the areas, verticals, if you will, would it be like social media? Would it be financial services? Would it be insurance? Would it be ad tech? Who are those people who will benefit from what we were going to build? And we had our own thesis, which turned out not to be the case. But eventually, when we did this research, we discovered that ad tech was just starting out. Display ad tech was just starting out with companies like AppNexus, the Trade Desk just being founded, and they were just on the cusp of where their existing loads were failing on the existing databases. This is exactly where I was at Yahoo a few years earlier. So they had already achieved that within a couple of years of founding. So we were right at the cusp. We discovered that, and every time we spoke to an ad tech person, they would say, yeah, we would use it and we would pay you, and nobody else said that. So we said, okay, you know what other features do you need which will make you successful? So we figured that out, and that was our version 2 of the product. We also actually were smart to call our first version as version 2.
Your first version was version 2 because it gave it a little bit of like.
To this day, no one has asked us, where is version 1 of the product? Somehow people are happy. So we did a little bit of marketing ourselves as technology people. We stumbled on it. But the interesting thing is we got into ad tech, and we immediately landed, even before we got our fundraising done, we got customers who were desperate, started using the product already. And they're still customers today. After 10 years, they've grown like 10x, 100x. So that's how we started. And then you asked about how did we find other things, right? So this went on for like, we got funded in the first, I think in January of 2011. We had bootstrapped it for a couple of years before that. Brian and I were the only 2 people. We had 3 customers before our first, and they were paying us real money, and the checks would show up. It was not online then, but there was no like online transfer of money.
But you get physical checks?
Yeah, I would get physical checks, and I would deposit it in Silicon Valley Bank. We had all this controversy over them. They've been great for us. So fundamentally, when we got the funding, we were supposed to get 10 customers and prove out the technology in 2011. Not only did we prove it out by getting 20 customers worldwide, not just in the US. See, that was like an amazing spurt in growth. We also got $1 million in revenue in the first year. And we had only gotten $2 million in funding. And this has been the story of Aerospike over the years, is we've always been a little bit ahead. So for whatever amount of money has been invested in, our ARR has been pretty close to the investment in the company. Every time we have an investment, we easily reach the ARR of how much we was invested. So that's actually pretty impressive, even if I look back on it, because it's been a discipline we have carried on through the years.
Aerospike has, from my perspective, and I haven't been here nearly as long as you, obviously, but has been very disciplined in how it spends its money and being like responsible with it. Responsible. You see some, I'll say like Uber, who like just goes and burns a ton of money, and like you guys have always taken a very responsible approach, which I've appreciated.
Yeah, because it's a difficult problem, because we have to be here long term to be successful. It's infrastructure that we're building. And it will take off at some point when enough people use it. But there has to be a level of patience to building the business so that we are around long enough. It's like building roads or tracks or whatever. It's like database is a serious business. Like you pointed out earlier, why would you even take this? It's such a daunting thing. And the reason we took it is because we felt we had the experience to start it, right? Because we didn't start it as 20-year-olds. We started as 40-year-olds. Which means we had already had 20 years of experience building these systems for other people. And now we said, okay, let's build it ourselves in this company.
You had experience, and you identified like a real need that just wasn't being solved at the time.
Right. And here's the prediction we made. And to answer, I didn't quite answer the previous question you asked, but let me answer it this way. The prediction we made when Brian and I started the company was that, yes, ad tech is the current target vertical, but we knew that since the move to the internet, and it's not just the internet, the move to how people perceive how to do their business, the impatience which people have in terms of making decisions. We are not happy anymore to go to the bank to withdraw some cash and pay something. You want to click a button on your phone, you tap somewhere, and you're done. And this is not just in one part of the world. Parts of the world like China and India have caught up. Everywhere there is no cash. In fact, there are parts of the world which are way ahead of the US in terms of payments right now. And that is a trend. We didn't know how it is going to happen, to be honest, but we predicted that, given this is going on, this is going to impact financial services a lot. It's going to impact pretty much every industry, gaming, e-commerce. So that's kind of the, and also telcos. We basically predicted that this particular internet concepts that we were working in, which were in ad tech and mobile and so on, we're going to spread to the entire industry, the industrial economy, if you will. Right? It'll eventually move into factories, it'll move into insurance, it'll move everywhere. Okay? And it's like a 20-year journey or whatever, right? And we are probably in the middle of 10 years in the middle, and it's already like crazy right now, right? And that prediction is what enabled us to get our subsequent rounds of funding, because we would go, and that's when we met companies like Schwab, PayPal, and Nokia. If you look at it, they're all in different areas to some extent. One is the brokerage firm, another one is in payments. The one is in telco, and we ended up. This was in 2014 and early 2015, and that got us our next round of funding, if you will, to continue the journey to expand the application of the Aerospike technology to more broad-based industry verticals, if you will.
And we continue, as we go. We've been adding new things on top. We built this amazing real-time thing, and when we continue. I don't know if you want to expand on it a little bit, but we've continued. I think next week we're releasing something pretty exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's actually a good question, because from the product side, which is kind of where my passion is, I guess, and Brian's passion, we wanted to build a great product which can solve real problems. The platform, and we have a great team. I think you've spoken to some of them already. But basically, we focus on building a system which is real time, as we spoke about, but also which is very efficient in terms of how it uses the resources, the hardware resources, the CPU and various resources.
Which is your total cost of ownership that you were talking about, right. Your TCO.
Right, and that's kind of a game changer, so to speak, for these kinds of, when you want to have the billionth user have the same user experience as the first user, you better have a tractable way of solving it without spending a whole lot of money on a per user basis. Like there are deployments that have been done on Aerospike for interbank money transfer. These are small amounts, like €5, $5 from person A to person B. The cost per transaction has to be negligible, because nobody's going to charge for the transfer. It's going to be free. The bank's going to have to provide it, which means the cost per transaction for such requests has to be fractions of cents. So they're spending like $1,000 a day to do like 1 million transactions, which means you can just give it away free, right? And then that's actually important, right? So given that is the trend that we are chasing, right? The product has been well tuned to do that. The platform is really, really good. Now, the interesting thing from an application point of view, which is kind of where you were getting to, is we focused on very simple key value APIs in the beginning. We enhanced that to a more general NoSQL concepts of documents. So if you look at the NoSQL API suite that Aerospike has, it's mostly key value and document oriented. Okay, and we also have certain things like geoindexes and so on, but it's all like NoSQL concepts. But then we also realized a few years ago, thanks to one of our customers actually alerting us to this fact, that Aerospike can be really good as a graph database. So we therefore got some experts in graph who have developed Tinkerpop and have worked on Gremlin to come and build out a graph capability on Aerospike using the same platform we just talked about, which has the well-tuned, high performance, low TCO, high uptime, with the distributed capability. We just built graph on top of it. And we've already found in some cases, that our graph implementation is superior at scale for transforming. When I mean at scale, I mean lots of graph edges. Typically, identity graphs are what we are really good for right now. We are adding, working on adding more features and more distributed database features coming into graph. But the point is, we are able to already show how we are better at scale than many established graph players. And that's very interesting because we're using the same platform with just a library on top.
Right. You have the same Aerospike down, and then, just on top, you've...
Yeah. So the other way to think about it from a product point of view is Aerospike has implemented an amazing data layer in the database sense. It's a data access layer and so on. The query layer or the processing layer on top has been very thin in the past. But with Graph, we're adding a really solid graph processing layer. And then the other one that we have kind of pre-announced or which is available in private betas is a vector capability, which is running on top of the same platform. Again, here for vector, it's a little bit more complex in terms of processing on the query layer. So what we are using is the distributed concepts that we have developed for the data layer. We are adapting and improving those to make it work for the vector query processing layer. So we have the know-how to do that, and we're basically inventing new algorithms. See, that's kind of the exciting part is we started with something very, really unique like hybrid memory architecture, but we haven't stopped there. We have invented a lot of things over the years, and the latest one being the vector query processing layer, which is in process right now.
Yeah, and it's I think we're going to beta with it soon. So that's like super interesting, and we're actually later today we're going to do a demo. There's with Art has built up. I think he showed that at Google Next.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not releasing anything people don't know, but well, I guess if you weren't at.
Well, I mean, these are things we have announced. I mean, we've talked about vector in Google Next too, so it's coming.
Yeah.
It's pretty much, and in fact, we're showing what we already have, but it's not generally available yet. So.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So that's like the growth of a database company from focusing on this one niche to, okay, we built this really amazing thing, and now we're going to expand on this database that gives us real-time data with one of or the lowest total cost of ownership as you're looking at it. I actually do find like the hybrid memory architecture to be really fascinating, where you gained all of that. So that's awesome, and that has led last month. Now I know I had jury duty, and so this was delayed, but one of the reasons I wanted to interview, Srini here is like he's been through this all, and just what was it? 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, it was 114.
Yeah, we've actually closed a greater than 100 million round in a market where it's difficult to close anything right now. If you look at it, not that many deals being made now, and it's an interesting story there. Because Aerospike has always lived within our means, but we also continue to innovate as we talked about. So we have tried to grow this company in a sustainable way, so to speak, which means when the market conditions changed recently, the fact that we were a really, really great company came through loud and clear as people were looking for places to invest with their money. And Aerospike basically is at this point, the only large deal that I've seen happen in the last 2 or 3 months, and that I think has been very satisfying for the people here in the company, for myself, because we've really worked hard to build a great company. We're not done by any means, but I think the fact that it's been recognized in this way, it makes a lot of difference, because now what we feel is we needed the money mostly to expand, like I talked about, in terms of the AI/ML space, where vector is, of course, a key component. Aerospike, over the years, okay, even in the earliest deployments like PayPal and Wayfair, we were used for recommendation engines, we used for fraud detection, we used for risk analysis, in companies like Barclays, PayPal, and so on. But the fundamental thing is, they're all based on some level of AI. This is typically nowadays, I don't know what to call it, but it's classical AI, let's just call it. Okay, as opposed to
statistical analysis.
Yeah, there's a lot of AI work that went in, and typically what happens is models were generated by training on a lot of data. The training typically in the earlier models was not done on Aerospike. The training was done on various other systems, but once the models were created, it was stored in Aerospike, and it was actually applied in real time to make decisions, to figure out a fraud score, to figure out what is the risk of a particular portfolio. What is the recommendation I want to show when a user is in there. So that's all real time. That all runs on Aerospike with models which are pre-trained and generated on other platforms. With the new Gen AI concept, I think if there is a real-time component to data access, especially if people don't want to load all of their data all into a public, engine in one of the big cloud providers, then what we can do is we can find a way to bridge the gap between, using, RAG and various other concepts to combine the LLMs with your own data to give you answers which are more meaningful without sharing your data to the entire wide world. And that could be a great application of Aerospike. And that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about the vector capability coming out, because combining the vector capability with the graph search capability and also the key value work that we've done with secondary indexes and so on means you can build richer applications with Aerospike on one platform without having to have a graph database and a vector database and a key value database, and then figuring out how all of this works with each other. We can make it much easier. In fact, we are showing, we have a meetup next week in New York City where our I think it's Tim Fox, Art, myself, we're going to be showcasing how you do vector search across these multiple components of Aerospike.
Next week, New York City?
No, I'm sorry, the week after, 2 weeks from now. So.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
So for anybody that's in New York City, that would be a fantastic thing to go to. That's awesome. That's awesome. Is there anything else? I'd like to give people a little bit of time. So if you guys would like to ask questions, we're going to wrap up in the next 5-ish minutes, I think. And then if you guys would have some questions, that would be great. Okay, so, I know later today we're going to have another little chat about what you see as the future of databases, and I'm sure that we're going to talk a little bit more about vectors and graph and just some of your thoughts on the database or the data world in general. Is there anything... I love to ask this question, and for everybody out there, I really do respect Srini a lot. I've learned a lot from him. He's a person that's always willing to share and help and encourage people to learn. If you could go back in time to 2009, 2010, what would be like the biggest thing that you would take as a learning that you've learned? Like if we could take the top 1 learning or 2 learning things that you've learned from this and could go back and tell you and Brian from the start, what would that be? Like, what would...
there are 2 of them. I'll discuss 2 of them. One of them is focus more on developers. So Aerospike, through its early journey, while we went through some of the motions, one of the fact that we started off as a closed source company, and then we later open sourced our community edition in 2014, I think, is when we did the open source version of the community edition. So we would have focused a lot more on developers over the years. We focused a lot on enterprise. We're still here, so it's not like we screwed up big time, but we could have done much better if we had started the developer outreaches much earlier. And I think we definitely, that is the one lesson for sure, and we've started doing that heavily over the last few years, and we're going to double down on it even more. So I think we'll rectify it within the next year or 2 to the level where you wouldn't know the difference anymore. But that is one key thing we would do differently. The other thing I would say, which I think is probably obvious to many of you, is software companies especially are made because we have great people in the company. And that's actually the most important thing. It's not the product, it's not the market. All of those things are important, but most important is the people who will be part of the company and will take it forward, because they build the product, they figured out the market. And I think we have been fortunate over the years to have a really, really excellent set of people in the company. And that I think is a lesson I did not know. I did not know, for example, how strong my own network was. Those are the things I learned over the time. If I had known that, I would have leveraged the network earlier, focused on these things. So we probably would have shaved off maybe 3 to 4 years in our journey, literally. Okay. And that definitely is, those are the two things I would bring up.
I think, maybe excluding some like myself, you guys have done a really good job. The amount of knowledge and the willingness to share, like the fact that, there's such a community in here of people that are willing to have those conversations with you where you're like, hey, Andy, I have no idea when you're talking about proles and this and what do you mean? He'll sit there and tell you and just share that information, and it just builds the Aerospike community. I've really appreciated that because it makes it easy. Even me as a remote person who doesn't get to see the people, I feel like I can go and talk to a lot of these people, and they're very willing to talk and communicate. And
And I'm so happy you see that, because one of the founding principles was we wanted to have smart people, but we also wanted to make sure they collaborate. Those are the two things which go together. Hire smart people, allow them to collaborate. Don't have to and we don't want people who just work on their own all the time, because I really believe that if you have a few smart people together, then the ideas that you come up with will be a lot better. It won't be 3 times better, it'll be 10 times better because of the back and forth which happens. People are opinionated and they bring different skills to the table, different knowledge, and you want to put all of it together to get the best possible solution to every problem.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I really appreciate it. That's one of the reasons I've really respected. I mean, I respect a lot of the things that you do, and that's one of them, and that encouragement. So, Russell asked, how do you feel about the open source based companies going closed source? So there's been a slew in the last 6 months to a year. Even before that, I think Mongo went with the SSPL a couple of years ago. What are I guess they're asking, what are your thoughts on that?
It's actually an interesting development, if you wish, because I go back all the way to Sun, okay? If Sun had open sourced the Solaris operating system, there would be no need to have Linux, frankly, okay? And one of the people who advised us when we decided to have an open source version for our product was Greg Papadopoulos, who was a key person at Sun. And he gave us advice that in the modern world, it is important for open source to exist for every product. But we also did a very limited, I think, we did what is called an open core approach, right? So as long as there is some portion of the product, for example, our product as of 2014 is actually open source, which means you can actually run it in production at scale. It just doesn't have the database features, okay? Now, to get to the actual question here, an open source company going closed source, hopefully they go to an open core model, because otherwise it seems like, they also have to have a business, I get that. And there is a lot of abuse, right? If you have an open source, I don't want to specifically call out any specific companies, but there are companies running huge businesses on other people's open source software, which they have worked hard on. I mean, these are not people who have invented it. They don't necessarily have contributors. So you can go figure out who I'm talking about. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. So I'm sympathetic to people who actually invented the software, who wants to protect some of the value. But I do agree that it has to be done carefully. And I do hope that there would be some level of back and forth on it. so that they could go to an open core model without alienating every developer or everybody who works on it, but also protecting their business from typically some of the hyperscalers, because they have a lot more resources than people who invent software. So, I mean, but that's the way it is.
Right. There's those of us who invent software, and there's those of us that use it. And awesome. All right. Any other questions? If you think of some other questions, I do have him on for another little bit later. To have a fireside chat about databases where we're just going to talk. I have some topics obviously in mind, but really it's supposed to be picking his mind. He spends his days and nights in databases and the future of them. And I'm really excited about that. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it absolutely has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right.